Hi everyone, we haven't had a second video in a while, so I'm sure you're super excited that we have one here. So we're continuing with our exploration unit. This is video 2, and it's about Spain building an empire. Now we're going to mention other explorers from Portugal and whatever. But remember when we began exploration, we said Spain and Portugal sort of led the way, or Portugal and Spain basically led the way. Then how it was replaced by the English and the Dutch. We're going to now backtrack a little bit to the beginning of exploration as it relates to colonization. So this definitely relates to these two standards. We touch on the slave trade. We're going to get into that a little bit more after break. It does mention a bit about the interactions between the Europeans and the indigenous people of the Americas. There's some other standards it hits on, but I figured these two the most. And also the essential questions about how colonization affects people. And also we'll get back to more about the motives and the effects. We've spoken a lot about the motives so far, but not so much the effects. So this video will touch on that as well. As always, it's a quick overview. We'll break it down more in class. So we've learned a lot about Columbus since basically kindergarten. We're learning more as we get older and analyzing it more as we get older. Some of the classes, during your presentations, the groups focused on Columbus, but not everyone. As we all know, he first came to the Americas in 1492, but that was his first of 4 voyages. And we've discussed in class that he was looking for a new route west. Now, you'll hear that debate that he wasn't really the first person to discover the Americas, and that's true, he wasn't. So what's the big deal? Basically is that this initiated colonization and that this became the first landing in the Americas that resulted in lasting contact. So now the people of the New World and the Old World were in constant contact with each other. Before, it didn't establish that. Columbus never actually set foot in what is the United States of America. It's a big misconception by many Americans that I want to make sure you understand. So here's the routes of his 4 trips. So you see he went to lots of the islands in what's the Caribbean, touched upon the top of South America and some Central America, but never, went to Florida or our coast or anything like that. So a few explorers. We have Pedro Cabral. He was from Portugal. He discovered Brazil and helped create what became plantations really for sugar. And Brazil continues to be a high exporter of sugar today. That was responsible for a big increase in the slave trade, which we'll get to later. We discussed in class about Portuguese being spoken in Brazil and the Treaty of Tordesillas and all that sort of stuff. We have Vespucci, Amerigo Vespucci, who America is named after. He's the one that realized, hey guys, this is not Asia. Like Columbus thought he landed in Asia, that's wrong. This is a whole new place. This is right? So they were looking for the Indies. So the Caribbean is often referred to as the West Indies. So Magellan, his was the first crew to circumnavigate the globe. Of course, very few of the original people who left made it back. He did sail for Portugal. He was looking for new routes also to the Spice Islands. Remember, he also did not survive this expedition. He was killed in battle in the Philippine Islands. Cortez. Now, you should have learned a lot about Cortez and Pizarro and the Aztecs and Incas when you were in middle school. So this is just a quick overview. So Cortez conquered the Aztecs. He first landed in Hispaniola, which is what's now Haiti and the Dominican Republic. He went to the island of Cuba, but then he started going to the interior, and he had plans to conquer. And Spain was like, whoa, 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 that's not what we're want to do right now. And he basically did it anyway. Eventually, Spain supports this interaction, but he sort of took that initiative on his own. You see the route there. He took to the interior with the Aztec capital of Tenochtitlan there on the body of water. Montezuma was the Aztec leader. He ruled from 1502 to 1520, and he was killed by the Spanish, even though he offered friendship when he first met Cortez. Now, the Aztecs, why were they subdued by the Spanish? Well, right off the bat, about 25 are lost to disease. And there's new research suggesting, did smallpox come completely from the Spanish, or did it relate to weather conditions that caused it to increase? We can discuss that in class if I share those pieces with you. But regardless, a large part of the population was decimated. Spanish also had firearms, which you can imagine is really hard to compete against if you don't have firearms. And also the Spaniards used strategy here. They allied with the Aztec enemies to help fight against them. Next, we have Pizarro. He was actually a distant cousin of Cortez, but he conquered the Incas, which is more west now in what's now, I guess, Peru. He had much fewer men than Cortez, which made his conquering more remarkable. I don't know if remarkable is the word you want to use, but he only had 80 men and 40 horses with him. And the Incan army was much larger than actually the Aztec army even was. So he settled in what's now Peru, and he had 3 expeditions there, the first one being of 1524. So you realize this is just 30 years after Columbus first comes, and things started happening pretty rapidly by the standards at the time. What happens when Spain is there is they start to establish the Encomienda System. And the Encomienda System, and this ties in a lot with those standards, is basically an organized labor system for agriculture. It was not complete slavery. The people were still living in certain areas and with their families, but it was basically a type of slavery. The agreement was given by the Spanish crown that you have a right to have these people basically work for you, but you have to make sure you bring them to Christianity. And this formally began in 1503 and formally lasted until 1720. Basically, the Spanish crown was like, this system isn't so good. It's actually being pretty cruel to these people, and we don't like it. But ironically, it led to the increase of slavery now that this system doesn't exist. So an example here I mentioned also was that lots of sugar plantations in Brazil relied on this Encomienda system. Getting back to some more explorers, Ponce de Leon, he's the first European explorer to reach what's now Florida, so what's like, United States. Coronado went into what's now the United States as well. He 1510 to 1554 was his age, or time of he was alive. He went into what's now Mexico and the southwestern United States between 1540 and 1542. You see his routes there on the screen. He discovered things like the Grand Canyon, the Colorado River, and important features of American geography. Like I said, we're going to get more to the slave trade after break, but I want you to see the correlation between colonization and the slave trade initially. The natives were dying of smallpox. The Encomienda system was formally ended. Indigenous people also made poor slaves because they knew the territory and they sort of could blend in. You didn't know if someone escaped kind of thing or not, if they were indigenous. The natives did try to fight back. But if you look at this graph here, you see how slavery increased during certain years. And you also see that it definitely started to increase significantly once that Encomienda system ended. Just an example that people did try to fight back, we have the leader Pope. Pope was a Pueblo leader. He was alive from 1630 to 1688. And he led a successful revolt in 1680 of natives against the Spanish. And it was so successful that they kept the Spanish out for 12 years. But as we all know, it wasn't a permanent situation. Okay, so I went through this pretty quickly. Like I said, this is a fairly much of an overview because you should have heard a lot of these names and these cultures before. Okay, the password for today is pumpkin. So you're going to put pumpkin on your Google form. All right, go ahead and work on your reflections as well. Take notes if you think that'd be a good idea. I'll give you a couple minutes to work on the reflections again in class. Okay, so I'll see you then. Pumpkin is the password.